Apparently it's an old watch. Where did you get it?
A garage sale.
Really cool watch. Mind me asking what you paid for it?
$20.
Do you know much about it?
I don't know anything about it. I just discovered it and it looked cool.
One of the greatest gifts you could give in the 19th century was a pocket watch. I have never seen anything like it.
Where did you get this thing?
I actually bought it at a yard sale.
It's not a rifle, it's a pistol.
Well, it used to be a rifle.
How is this ever a rifle?
People collect Smith & Wessons. This is the crown jewel right here. It's really rare. And how much did you want for it?
I was hoping to get $5,000 for it.
A lady walks in with not just a regular book, but a medical book. What's unbelievable is that it was a King George psychiatry book. It has been sitting for 250 years. Amazing. What are her hopes?
I came prepared to negotiate, but I'm pretty confident the book is worth $2,500.
This is definitely cool. So where did you get it?
I bought that at a thrift store.
We are curious too. She goes on to explain the book's content, but I'm pretty sure he is after its worth. Rick doesn't know much about books, so he opts to call in an expert.
Am I down to take a look at this? Because I have no idea what it could be worth. Do you mind hanging out for a few and having her come down?
No, that...
Look who we have here. Rebecca is here to examine and give a detailed analysis of the book. Corey seems concerned about its state.
So what do you think about the condition?
The condition actually is quite nice. I mean, you can see that there's wear around the joints and things, but this is probably the earliest binding that was put on that book. And, you know, it's still intact, it's still usable. So could I have you show me this book in a little bit of detail?
That's understandable. Rebecca dives in to enlighten the seller and Corey about the bookplate. Luckily, the inscription gives us more hints on what we are dealing with.
And it's mentioning he's gifting it to someone who donated Jonathan Knight's copy of this edition to the Yale Medical Historical Library. So because this person donated their copy...
Great. Now it's time to find out the worth of this book. The news got the seller grinning from ear to ear. Let's hope she strikes a good deal with Corey.
Well, I gotta say, this rarely ever happens, but you came in and you asked for $2,500, and I'm more than comfortable giving you that. So, you wanna make a deal at $2,500?
We have a deal. We have a deal.
One condition.
In this scene, Annie comes in with a weird-looking item. You can't tell that it is an X-ray machine from afar. Well, what do you expect from an antique item? She believes it might have value, but we must hear Rick's opinion on this.
If I'm able to make a sale, I will put it towards buying a plasma cutter. I like to work with metal.
That's really cool. So where did you get this thing?
It was found by a friend in a shed, packed full of stuff.
Watch as he continues to explain. He sure knows how to give good tutoring. Rick points out that Röntgen invented X-rays. He seems to know a lot about different items. Let's go on to the next stage.
He was a really famous professor. He did tons of experiments, electrical experiments, and eventually he figured out a process to get a good X-ray on a human being.
Right, he goes ahead to examine the item correctly. He might not be particular about the dating, but he's sure it is from World War II. Unfortunately, there is a problem.
General Electric X-ray Corporation didn't start until the 1930s. This is probably 1940s, World War II-ish. By that time, They knew the X-rays weren't good for you. And you don't have the main part.
I don't have the main part that probably took
Okay,
the
you don't have the
actual
giant
X-ray.
X-ray tube, the CRT.
No, do not.
What could it be? An incomplete item wouldn't work for Rick. What is her proposal? Is Rick going to work with it or leave this item? Stay hooked to find out.
How much did you want for it?
I was looking to get $1,200.
Okay. A lot of people buy these for the tubes and the parts. The most expensive part is the X-ray tube.
That's not here.
That's not here. And basically, since you don't have it all here...
What else do we have on display? Debbie stopped by the pawn shop to sell an item gifted to her by her friend. She meets Rick to know if he's going to take this item. What does Rick think about this?
This is basically like the start of modern medicine. It was invented in 1881 and it was used to measure blood pressure. This monitored basically your whole pulmonary system and it measures the pressure in your arteries. Diagnosing hypertension did save lives.
Why don't we see how he reacts? Okay, he seems pretty interested in this blood pressure gauge. He tells the seller that it was invented in 1881. I guess we have heard enough of the stories. He moves on to offer a demonstration of how it works.
Very useful tool. So this was filled with mercury.
Yeah.
They would tilt it to the side till it spilled out a little bit, then closed it. And then when they went back up like that, when the mercury dropped, that would just be a vacuum. You didn't want any air in this at all.
That's pretty interesting. How much is Rick willing to sell this gauge for? I'm no expert, but I think Rick isn't going to go for an incomplete item, but I'm not entirely sure. Why don't we watch how it turns out for Debbie?
That makes it really, really hard. I mean, usually the people who buy this are like doctors and stuff like that. They put it on their shelf so their friends can come and look at it. But when all the parts are missing, it's not nearly as cool and it's really hard to sell. It's interesting, but I'm gonna pass on it.
Christine comes to the store with an Eastman Kodak camera that her husband gave her. Because of its rarity, Christine is confident it is a unique camera. Does Rick agree with her?
Because it is serial number 5, and I haven't seen anything that comes close to being this low of a serial number in any of my research. I'm hoping to sell my Eastman camera for $10,000.
Well, before he makes a conclusion, he gives a ride around its history. The seller is so interested in his stories that she is almost carried away. Rick offers to examine the camera. Guess what? More stories.
George Eastman was brilliant. Originally, what he did was he would sell you a camera, and it just came preloaded. You couldn't even change it yourself. It was an amazing business model because you kept on having to deal with Kodak. They made the...
Here, take a look. I'm curious to know if this wooden item can take pictures. That's fascinating. But has it been confirmed as genuine? I hope so. However, Rick is curious to know if it is actually from Kodak. Will he strike a deal with her for this unauthenticated camera? I wouldn't know.
So have you ever had this thing checked out by Kodak?
My husband and I sent a photograph of the camera to the museum up in Rochester, New York, but we just haven't heard back from them yet.
How much you want for it?
You know, based on the fact that the serial number is 5, I was hoping to get up near $10,000.
In this scene, a seller meets the pawn shop owner and his son, hoping to sell an alleged pre-Civil War item. She claims that it is a daguerreotype studio camera. Well, how do we know for sure? It is up to them to determine if it is or not.
This is pretty cool. Daguerreotypes were the very first type of photography. It was called a camera obscura.
Okay.
Really crude. Before they had negatives, everything was printed right onto a piece of metal with the chemicals on it and everything else. So
Okay.
it wasn't a negative, it was a positive.
Okay.
Because once you...
Even the old man chips in something about this item, but it may seem that something isn't right with this item. I can't place a finger on what could be wrong.
1890s, because Eastman Kodak didn't even come to existence till the 1880s. The reason the Eastman Kodak company came along is because they invented flexible film, so you could put it in a roll. So that's not daguerreotype at all.
Yeah,
Way
I was
different.
going off of what I saw on the internet, so.
Yikes, but at least it could still be collectible. Unfortunately, Melinda's intended aim can't be realized. Let's see how much they offer her.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking I'll give you $1,500 for it.
This is something that you don't see every day. Would you be willing to go 2,000?
You know, it's not usable anymore or anything like this. I'll meet you in the middle at $1,750. That's what I could go on it.
Mary comes bearing an item for sale. Another camera. Well, she hopes to strike a deal on her vintage camera. Would an item found in the attic be worth anything? I don't know. Let's watch how Rick reacts.
This is really uber cool. Do you know anything about it?
I do know it's a Bernauer camera.
Okay. And the lens, you know, it's Bell and Howell. They were really big on lenses back then.
Interesting. Rick offers Mary some free lectures about this camera. It was a high-profile tech during the 1930s. Surprisingly, Rick admitted that he wasn't familiar with this brand at some point. Anyway, what is she asking for?
Newsreel footage and other things, you needed this 16mm, and you had to pay for it.
Probably pretty high tech for the day.
There's a lot of neat innovations in this thing. When this camera was built in the 1930s, hundreds of man-hours went into build. This is precision machining.
Rick is still not certain about this particular item. As much as he's eager to learn more, he wants to be certain of what he's getting. He wants to bring a professional in this field to assist him.
Have here is, I don't see any stickers on it or anything. You don't have the plug for it, do you?
I don't.
This is one of the things that hurts me, and I don't know. I don't know if everything worked. And it's got a really bizarro brand. It's some weird stuff you have going on.
Okay, the expert is here. Let's hear his opinion. He reveals that it is a Berndt and Maurer camera. I'm sure you would love to hear more about this item. Let's find out more, shall we?
Right made for you.
It's a beautiful 16mm camera. I mean, it's got all these weird things going for it. I have no idea what it's worth.
I'm an auctioneer, do Hollywood, rock and roll, and sports auction. I love stories. To me, that's what I collect. You know, people collect stuff, I collect the stories.
Interesting. The expert gives a detailed and informative speech about this item. However, it's obvious that Rick is only worried about his worth.
To the guitar.
Okay.
He has 90 patents during his lifetime. They are fantastic cameras. It's also very, very rare.
It's really neat, but I don't know what it's worth.
It is. It's a fantastic camera. We don't know whether it works or not, which can have some impact, but I think possibly it could be made to work.
That's a valid point. Moving on to the evaluation. What is the final judgment? Will Mary be able to get a nice deal so she can buy stuff for her baby? I'm eager to find out.
Pleasure. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, the camera is in great condition. So this is something that you have it on the shelf in your living room. You have it in your office.
Okay, so, I mean, what's the best you'll take for it?
I would like 3,000 for it.
Matt encounters Rick with one bizarre item. What could he be hiding up his sleeves? He goes ahead to show Rick, and boy, Rick stands frozen, at a loss for words.
A little creepy.
My wife, she went to an estate sale and found a vintage leather trunk. And when we got it home, we opened it up, and inside was this device. I have no idea if it worked or not. I'm not willing to try it.
It's just...
Whoa! The seller goes on to enlighten Rick about the breast enlargement kit. It kept getting weird and awkward. You would agree with Rick that this is just a bit crazy. What next?
Pure insanity. What do you want to do with it?
I'd like to sell it.
How much do you want for it?
$1,000.
It's definitely a curiosity.
There's somebody out there that will pay a lot of money for this.
This is my problem.
Well, Rick is unsure about having something like this. I wonder what Chum and Corey will think of it. Will he pass on something like this, or will he take it? Watch as it unfolds.
There is a market for this, but it's not for me. I'm sorry.
This guy has nothing to pawn except this antique Lebenswecker. He comes in with a pad on his shoulder to prove that the item is worth buying. Rick wonders where Todd got it from.
I found it at an estate sale. It's got a grouping of needles.
Things like this were really common in the 1800s. There was no Food and Drug Administration. Doctors were more or less allowed to do anything to you, and this was one of the quack things they did.
That aside, he slowly shows Rick and Corey how it works. He is bent on convincing Rick, but Corey wants to test it on his dad, which seems childish. Here, take a look.
All right. This thing is crazy. It seems more like a torture device than a medical instrument. There's a big market for 19th century medical devices. Hokier, the better. How much did you want for it?
I was thinking $400.
What do you expect from him? Let's focus on the main agenda. Rick is in a tough spot. Let's see his next move.
$350.
That's what I'll get out of it if I'm lucky. $250. Every time I get something weird like this, it takes me a while to sell it. It's neat, but it's not $350 neat.
I can do $250.
All right, deal. Wanna go write them up?
I've got an extra $250 in my pocket. Maybe I'll go add something else cool to my collection.
There is more ancient medical stuff, and we are here for it. Larry comes in with a huge item for sale in the pawn shop's garage. Rick is amazed by how this iron lung has survived throughout the years. Chum doesn't have an idea about it, and Larry doesn't even know its value. Well, it is up to Rick to enlighten us.
Polio or some other diseases, it caused paralysis of your chest muscles, so therefore you couldn't breathe. So you would lay in that thing, and basically it would suck the air out, which would make your chest expand, and then they would let the air back in, and your chest would go down, and it would help you breathe when you were going through certain diseases.
Cool. Rick quickly examined this item and thoroughly checked it out. I'm sure it must have felt like a movie for him. Medical histories have indeed evolved over the years.
Finding a buyer for this is going to be a problem. It's huge and kind of creepy. How much were you looking to get out of it?
$100,000.
You got a lot of problems here. It's in terrible shape, and no one collects this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but the main question is it collectible? Is it okay to strike a bargain despite the condition? Plus, regarding the price, I don't think Rick will pay for something of no value. Could it be random scrap at the end of the day? You and I will have to figure that out.
If I take a closer look at it,
Go ahead.
the porthole still open up?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I can't imagine living in this thing. And some people lived in these things for years and years and years. It's basically there except for the glass.
All the soft parts are gone. The hard parts are all there.
Value-wise, it's right up there with scrap.
It is not every day that we see a doctor stopping by the pawn shop. Just as shocking as it sounds to you and me, the Pawn Stars were surprised when Larry entered the shop. He came in with a surgeon's chest for sale. Interestingly, he hopes to strike a fair bargain for it.
More people would have died when they used these tools because they didn't sterilize them. But at the time, this was the best there was, and that's what they used.
Great, let go. It's crazy to hear that these different tools were sterilized when they wanted to be used for something. Rick goes on to examine each of the tools.
Finger amputations.
The amazing part is you rarely see these things complete, where there's always something missing.
That's much for this item. Rick thinks the price Larry is demanding is too much. Is an item with medical value and historical value worth it? Let's find out.
I mean, what can you really do?
Well, I'm thinking $3,000. It's kind of a cross-collectible for both medical and military collectors.
Chum cites this pretty lady in the pawn store who brings in a leather jacket for sale. These kinds of things actually freak Chum out. She's clueless about the item. Oh, it seems her dad was a nice collector for him to have this in his possession. Undoubtedly, it is eye-catching. Additionally, its value increases because it dates from the Second World War.
Don't really know much about it.
Is your Harley parked out front?
I'm at the pawn shop today to try to sell my vintage leather biker jacket that I believe is from either World War I or World War II. I'm hoping to get $1,000 for this jacket, especially since vintage clothing is coming back and the jacket is in such good condition.
That's pretty cool, but I don't think Rick will pay $1,000 for something he's unsure of. To avoid an earful from the boss, he decided to have an expert come take a look.
I was thinking 1,000.
I mean, that's not out of the question. Honestly, if it checks out, I could probably give you more than $1,000 for sure and still leave room to make some money.
That would be great.
But I have some questions about this jacket. Can I have someone come down and take a look at it? They specialize in, military memorabilia. You have a little time to wait?
Yeah, for sure. No problem.
Great choice. The expert is here, and he takes his time to describe each label on the jacket. Each label has some history attached to it, and the expert attests to its uniqueness.
It's actually really classic German pilot leather jacket. A Luftwaffe pilot would have had this. It's got that high crop. So the way this would have come about is an American soldier would have captured the German pilot and taken his jacket, and then essentially he made this a memento of the war.
But there is one issue. Does it look authentic? Well, I'm desperate to find out. The expert will have to dive deeper to authenticate it. Let's see how it goes.
You can see here on this A and B, you see all that spidering of the paint, and you see how the leather itself has little peaks and valleys. If it were newly painted, you would see the paint inside all the little valleys and nooks and crannies. And so I am completely sure that that paint is authentic to the World War II period.
So far, so good. The evaluation wowed and excited Gillian. But Chum has the final say right here. Is he going to offer a fair amount or a much lesser amount?
Inside all the little valleys and nooks and crannies.
How much is it worth?
It's a one-of-a-kind piece, and it is fantastic. I would not be surprised to see this thing sell at $12,000.
Wow.
All right, well.
Amanda walks in with an antique pocket watch and is willing to sell it for any amount. She doesn't really know much about it, and it is clearly not your regular type of watch. She's up for any grab because she doesn't know its worth. Anyway, let's hear it from Richard.
Really cool watch. Do you mind me asking what you paid for it?
$20. I came into the pawn shop today to try to sell my antique pocket watch. I'd like to sell it because I don't collect pocket watches. If I get $500, if I get $800, I'll be happy. Anything works for me.
Do you know much about it?
I don't know anything about it. I just discovered it and it looked cool.
Let's dive into it. Rick gave Amanda more insight into the watch. It actually belonged to a Civil War veteran. Pocket watches were used as gifts. But guess what? It works. You could literally see the way her face lit up. Nice.
Positive, right?
Yes, I mean, the great thing about this watch is it's in amazing shape. It works great. The case is in amazing condition. We have a porcelain dial on it that doesn't have one crack. These things are notorious for cracking. There's a huge market for Civil War stuff, and a pocket watch in this condition with engraving on the back could be worth a fortune. Collectors would line up out the door to buy this thing.
It might be a valuable piece, but the expert may dispute it. The stakes are really high. What is the result?
There are a number of Robert M. Scotts out there. There are a number of Earl Butlers out there. They don't show up in the historic record individually that I could find.
I mean, the watch is really cool. I mean, it seems like it's from the right time period and everything like that. Do you think it's legit?
Moving on. Why is Rick offering less after hearing the evaluation? It is not really what she expected. Let's see how the bargaining goes.
$700.
But the battle's $1,800.
If it didn't have that engraving on it, is literally worth $400 or $500. Let me give you $1,000.
Come on, you're gonna make a profit either way. How about 15?
I just don't know what I'm gonna get out of it. I'll go $1,300, not a dime more.
13 will work.
Okay, $1,300.
Here is someone who wants to sell her Stamp Act collection. Are these valuable or not? We can't tell. She approaches Chum. Let's see how well it goes for this duo.
They're definitely unique. I know they're not like the stamps that we use today, that's for sure. I'm asking $250 for the stamps. I feel like they're worth some value because of how old they are.
This is pretty cool. I mean, basically what the Stamp Act was is the British Parliament deciding that all British citizens need to pay a paper tax, whether they live on this continent or in Britain. So they imposed this Stamp Act of 1765.
Well, I'm eager to find out. Chum doesn't really know the value. Rick would have been the best man for this, but he's unavailable. Chum decides to get an expert.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a couple minutes.
It could be worth a lot of money.
I'd like to hear what the expert has to say because I'm confident they're valuable, but I'm not exactly sure how much. I'm just taking a while.
So, this is what I called you about? I thought it was pretty interesting, but Rick wasn't around, and I figured even if he was, he'd call you down anyways.
He would love this. Yes, you're right. These are really, really interesting.
That will suffice. Let's hope the professional does justice to it. The British issued all sorts of stamps too, but if it is actually an American stamp, we are good to go. You wouldn't believe it checks out. Nice. Just look at the excitement on Elizabeth's face.
Yeah, this one says America. This is wonderful. So this is an important stamp.
Seems like there'd be a lot of these if you had to stamp it on every piece of paper.
You would think it was a relatively short-lived act. It was introduced in 1765 and just a few months later repealed.
Right, let's see the expert evaluation. What will the expert reveal? How much are we talking about here? Let's see if the seller gets a good bargain for this item.
1,000 now. How does that sound to you?
Sounds like a little too much to me. Would you take 450?
450. That, I think maybe if it was just these, but...
What are you thinking?
Well, I don't want to sell them for half what they're worth, so how about 650?
Think you could do 600?
I don't think so. That's a little too low. That's almost selling them for half what they're worth.